You are listening to Para X.
Welcome to He Said, She Said, the Cryptid Show. I am Tommy Cooper with co-host Stephanie Langer. How are you doing tonight, Stephanie?
I'm doing great, Tommy. How are you on this Sunday evening?
Fantastic. How about that sunshine? How about that weather? Isn't it great?
My goodness. You know, it was like close to 50 here in Minnesota today, which can I say for the end of February? That's amazing in and of itself.
Yeah, we'll take that.
Yes.
It was very nice in Cryptovania today as well today. I actually got one of my favorite phone calls. The guy with the stuff going on around his house.
Yeah.
And so I got to go do an on-site investigation today and found all kinds of neat stuff and got the video things.
Yay!
Yeah, it was great.
Now you got to go there at night and see if they come back, and just hang out.
Yeah, it wasn't that far in the woods. I mean, it was in the woods, but there were neighbor houses around pretty close. So it's an interesting dynamic. I can't wait to hear what else happens there. And I can't wait to go back.
You'll have to keep us posted.
Yes, sure will. Well, tonight's guest is Mr. Aleksandar Petakov from Petakov Media. I had the good fortune to meet this young man in person and do some night hiking with him. He's quite an expert in the field of mountain lions, and he's quite a mountain climber too. So that being said, it's my pleasure to introduce everyone to Mr. Aleksandar Petakov. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, how are you guys doing tonight? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome to our crazy show, can I just say, because we are a little nuts here.
You don't have to be crazy to be on it, but it helps.
Yeah, for sure.
Aleksandar, let's jump right into it because this topic is so near and dear to the hearts of so many people that are friends of mine locally and stuff. Mountain lions. Who is behind this cover-up of their existence and why?
Oh, yeah, that's the golden question, right? That's what everyone wants to know. I mean, it's so strange. I mean, for me, from my perspective, what I've focused on for this documentary in particular has been the New England area, right? So we're kind of the furthest northeast in the U.S., but the more and more I've looked into it, you have all these sightings, obviously, where you're at, Pennsylvania, Cryptovania, Minnesota, Wisconsin. There's probably more sightings than there are over here, just because of the proximity of the populations that are the established populations that we have in some of the states, like South Dakota, the Rockies, kind of going westward. So there's always been this element of this cover-up. I mean, I remember just hearing stories when I was growing up of people saying they saw mountain lions around the woods in New Hampshire, and I was like, I didn't expect that to be a thing. And you just hear people nonchalantly say, "Oh, yeah, the government knows they're here. They just don't care about it, right? They keep it secret because of whatever reasons." And I went into this project a little bit more, I want to say, skeptically minded. I try to take the middle road, because I've never had a sighting. I know really close personal friends who have seen mountain lions while hunting or just out in the woods and had a face-to-face, in an area, New England here, where they're not supposed to exist technically anymore, right? Or so we're told. But the more I've looked into it, the more I've come across cases where it seems like there's sort of a concerted effort to keep this information down in a way. And there's some cases that have been recognized. Most famously in 2011 in Connecticut, there was a mountain lion that was killed like an hour outside of New York City, of all places.
Wow.
And so they did genetic testing on it, and what we were told was that its genetic makeup was from a group of mountain lions from South Dakota. So apparently this cat had traveled that entire distance. I mean, there's obviously some people think that's kind of controversial, whether or not that assessment is true. I'll leave that up to people to kind of make up their own mind. But that's one of the cases. You have a couple other cases, but I have actually, in the documentary, I feature cases of confirmed mountain lion DNA that was discovered and tested in labs that's been sort of systematically downplayed, including one that was a horse attack here in rural Massachusetts a couple of years ago. So, there's a lot of, I think unfortunately what happens is there's like a distrust between the public and the authorities. Where, having talked to game wardens and Fish and Game and people that work for these sort of wildlife departments here in some of the states in New England, I think they're kind of stuck in the bureaucratic system as much as, people sort of are. They can't really say whether or not mountain lions are here because they have the higher-ups that make the orders, right, make calls. So the individual game wardens and the officers that are out there, I don't think they're personally, they have some nefarious motive. They're just kind of stuck in this bureaucracy of, well, if you have a sighting, I can't confirm or deny unless you have some really good evidence present. So it becomes like a big sort of thing between the public and the authorities where there's just a level of trust and then conspiracies, and you have these sort of cover-up situations. So I don't think it really does anyone any favors.
How many of these game wardens off the record will confide in you off the record that you're indeed on the right track and this is a reality? Is it a large percentage, or is it just one here or there?
I mean, the few that I've talked to, I've had like the state of Connecticut, like nobody ever got back to me. I was never able to be in contact with anyone. I spoke to former officers there in Massachusetts, and then in the documentary interviewed a guy who's with Fish and Game, which is our kind of department here. Every state is like a different, this Fish and Wildlife, Fish and Game, whatever. Fish and Game warden for New Hampshire, and then a game warden in Vermont. They have a little bit of different system. They all pretty much say that, they don't necessarily disbelieve the mountain lions are here. They say, it's perfectly reasonable that there could be one at this moment traveling through the state or multiple ones. They just don't think there's a viable breeding population. So I would say they're not even that scared to admit that what's going on. But, I never really pry too deeply into, about these stories about people saying that some were brought in to contain deer populations or some of them other more kind of controversial topics. So I'd say, like I said, for the most part, they will admit, they say it's very possible. We just don't think there's a breeding population. I think it'd be very difficult to get them to admit that, though, even if you did have the evidence, because you have to take into account things like tourism, which is a huge, for New Hampshire in particular, New Hampshire and Vermont, tourism is like some of the biggest industry. We get a lot of skiers. We don't want people freaking out and also arming up or going out there and shooting at everything that's moving. I mean, you have to understand from an administrative position, I guess, the dilemma they face. But I think it's just a shame because, like I said, there's a distrust between the public and these people. Like, there's just not a good relationship there.
Yeah, that's.
And these animals are we technically own them as the public, right? Like, we own the land. I mean, the government. In some cases they do, but we should have more of a dialogue going. And I think there's a lot of people here who genuinely think that it's just it's all just bad sightings. People just and no, there's definitely been proven cases. I mean, there's no doubt.
Well, it's kind of like Jaws, and they knew. I know that's a fictional thing, but what if they're afraid it's going to hurt tourism, they're not going to talk about it, right? Down low, we don't want to talk about it. I
think it comes down to money a lot of the times because
that's right.
Not only
doesn't everything
tourism that would be lost, but you have to deal with an animal like a mountain lion. It's not like a bear or a moose, which are the biggest animals we have around here, where you have to deal with them in certain ways. Mountain lion is a totally different beast, so to speak. I mean, you have to have a management program, and we know all these government agencies, they're always complaining about how they're cash strapped.
Yes.
So the last thing they want to do now is have to deal with another apex predator that's coming in. But I think they're going to have to eventually, because it's a factor that we will have a population at some point if we don't already.
Yes.
At least in my opinion.
Now, go ahead.
Is it your feeling that these mountain lions, are they cougars or are they jaguars? Because I've heard it said that the ability to produce a black cougar is, 1 in a trillion, whereas a black jaguar is not that uncommon at all. And so many of my fellow hillbillies all throughout Appalachia are seeing black ones everywhere.
So that's a really interesting part of the mystery. I think it's like a subset of this whole mystery. So the controversy is around what you consider a normal mountain lion, right? A tawny colored mountain lion. And so there's this phenomenon called melanism, which you have melanism and albinism. So you know how there's albino gorillas, there's albino alligators. There's also on the other spectrum melanism, where it's just a completely black animal. And this happens of various species. Now, there's no documented cases of this happening in a puma concolor, the mountain lion. We do have it happening in bobcats, though, which are pretty much the most commonly mistaken animal for a mountain lion in some of the cases, where people don't really see that defining tail. So the Black Panther thing has been really interesting because it's not really just in the U.S. You have in the UK, it's a very big phenomena. The Black Beast of Exmoor. Australia, they call it alien big cat. And these are places where they don't have any sort of indigenous big cat population, right? Especially the UK. I mean, that's been a managed area for centuries. But you have, like you said, throughout Appalachia and here in New England, stories of people seeing Black Panther. And I have a couple reports that I've heard going back to the 1930s of people seeing what they called a panther, right? And they said it was a mountain lion, but it was coal black. That was one of the descriptions. Or I heard of a couple ones where actually one of the researchers that's featured in the documentary, she said that a gentleman had seen a, quote, normal colored mountain lion side by side with a coal black mountain lion. I mean, they looked the same. One was very dark and one was the normal tawny color you'd expect, which is really interesting. So either there is some sort of melanism and it's never proven, or I mean, I would have a hard time believing that you have stories of black panthers or jaguars, or black leopards and jaguars essentially are the only two big cats that get that black color. I find it hard to believe that they would have so many of them in the 1920s, roaming around in rural New England, escaped pets or circus escapes is so often pointed to. I find that kind of hard to believe. So I don't know what exactly is going on. There are a couple of sightings that I know from that time period. One turned out to be like a local dog, and another one was actually somebody had seen a fisher cat. Fisher cats had been off the landscape for a while in the sense that they had been pushed out like many other species for deforestation, and once they returned, maybe somebody wasn't used to seeing what a fisher cat looked like, and they saw one and they said, oh, it's a black panther, or it's some kind of a black big cat. But I mean, there's something weird going on. And it's a minority of sightings from what I've been able to gather. It's like 65-70% of all the sightings are what you'd expect. The tawny color and the range of the mountain lion colors from like a lightish, whitish yellow to almost a dark brown, but nothing really black. But then you have a minority of sightings where it's like a Black Panther-like cat, which would be very weird. And I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's almost an entire mystery unto itself within this.
Do you think, so Karen in our chat room is saying, do you think maybe the black ones are exotic animals that have been released or escaped from captivity and have bred?
Mean, like I said, I that's probably a factor in it, but I just find it hard to believe that there'd be thousands upon thousands of these cats being released. And a lot of these states nowadays, it's very hard to have an exotic pet like that. It's very really super regulated. And I mean, I would. Some people even say that a lot of the mountain lions seen are South American cats that have been captured and released for that reason. So it's just kind of a big question mark at this point. But I think, especially if you look at some of the cases from down south, these Black Panthers, the Beast of Bladensboro, North Carolina is another one where it's just to have a longer history of sightings. Our year to year, which would indicate that this creature surviving and kind of thriving in an area which, for a tropical big cat from near the equator, how would it be able to survive in some of these harsher climates that we have in the Northeast or in other parts of the America? So It's a big question, but it's one that people often ask about, and I talk about it a little bit in the documentary. It's not the main focus, but you can't talk about this subject without mentioning it because it's just part of it.
Well, it's just so exotic and kind of, almost, ooh, the Black Panther. But, when I was down in Kentucky a couple of years ago, we were right on the, kind of like the it was Kentucky and Virginia and Tennessee is where we were. And there was a researcher there that researched Black Panthers. And she said, oh, they're alive and well in that area where she was. So, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even when I was down in Arkansas last year, people were talking about how they would see panthers. They'd say, oh, yeah, we see mountain lions and panthers, as if they were differentiating the two.
And we've
growing up with them.
Well, and even in Wisconsin, there has been reports of a black panther near Lake Michigan, I believe, somewhere. So interesting stuff. I mean, wow. We do have mountain lions here in Minnesota, and there are quite a number of them, and all over the state, mostly in the northern tier, I think. But, I think people are afraid of mountain lions because they are so lethal. They're so deadly. Bears can be deadly, but mountain lions, I mean, if they come at you from up above us, and kill you, right?
Well, it's like people are scared of tigers, lions, the lions of Savo, whatever killer stories you've heard about these big cats. And since most people have grown up in areas that aren't supposed to have mountain lions, it's kind of seen as exotic. I mean, people who live out west or in areas that there's larger populations that are very well documented, they have to deal with these things on a daily basis, and there are attacks. I mean, cats are that's the kind of, it's what's sort of romanticized about them, something like a mountain lion, right? We have domestic house cats, which most people still don't even understand. It's an interesting relationship people have with their cats, yet you have this apex predator. I mean, there's really no predator greater in North America than the mountain lion. And it's what's so interesting about it as an animal is how adapted it was to every single environment in the continent. I mean, you have it living from the Rocky Mountains to the redwood forest, to the high deserts of the Southwest, to the swamp of the South, to the Everglades, to all the deciduous forest throughout the East. I mean, there's no other animal that has that great of a distribution, which is I think, very interesting. I mean, aside from human beings, there's no other animal that has much a territorial range in its historical range.
Yeah.
And does the mountain lion cougar, does it not have the most lethal bite of anything because of the cleaver action when the mouth closes? Not only does it have the closing pressure, but it also draws back at the same time and has the cleaver effect?
I'm not too sure, but I know that it has a tremendous amount of bite force with the jaw. Yeah, you're definitely right. I mean, it's just like that thing clamps onto you. You're not gonna have a good time, that's for sure.
You're about to lose a limb.
Yeah, so they're definitely lethal, and I think that's why a big reason why people are so scared or don't want to deal with it, or why the states are so reluctant. I don't know. I mean, that's up for discussion, obviously.
In Pennsylvania, I mean, I know how insane it is for people like me to believe that there are mountain lions in Pennsylvania, like maybe around Penn State, where the mascot is the Nittany lion. But down in this area, I've heard it said that there was a cat there at one point in history that is it extinct now, but it's on the order of a cougar type of thing, but maybe it's a little bit different with the snout or something. I was just wondering if you ever hear anything about this, or if there's some remnant of that's thought to maybe influence the genetics of these lions of the East.
Yeah, that's interesting. This is something I definitely don't talk about in the documentary because I think it's way over people's heads for the most part. Or just it's a different topic. I've heard of people saying that they've seen, not necessarily here in New England, or maybe some parts of New England, seeing some sort of a creature that's remnant of the North American cheetah, which was one of these kind of Pleistocene big cats, and it was different from like an African cheetah, and it was a lot darker in color. Some people, I've heard that up in places like British Columbia and into Alaska, there's been more sightings of something like that, because even in Alaska, they technically don't have mountain lions. That's above their range. If still do see them. But there's this other kind of creature that has a little bit of a bushier tail, supposedly, from what they've been able to gather. I've had some people kind of talk about that and say maybe there are pockets of those that have survived. Or like you mentioned, maybe there was some sort of a genetic differentiation that happened with these animals and what we now know as mountain lions.
Mm-hmm.
There were, mountain lions were not the only big cat in North America. Obviously not. So, I don't know. I think that's, like I said, a whole nother topic unto itself, but definitely very fascinating to wonder about.
Is that the next movie? I just got to throw that in there. Is that the next one? Because that sounds really interesting,
Maybe someday. I don't know. I'm going to take a little bit of a cat break after this.
Well, as long as we're on the subject, Alexander, the name of your movie and when it is coming out and all that sort of thing, you've got a movie coming out in about a week, I believe, don't you?
So it's going to be premiering in 2 weeks now, March 14th. Yeah, on the 14th here in New Hampshire, I'm doing a screening, and then it's going to be out pretty much after that for the general public, in the sense of DVD sales will go up, and then I do have a pre-order now. So what that means is, if you order it now, in a couple weeks when I get the DVDs before the premiere, those will start shipping out, and then I'm going to hopefully have it on Amazon and some of the online sites in March and towards the end of that month. Just you got to deal with all the contracts and everything like that.
And the title of your upcoming movie?
Oh, Lions of the East.
Outstanding.
So obviously it's about this topic, focusing heavily on New England, of course, given that that's where I'm at. And there's just a lot of interesting stories. And so if you're interested in the subject and want to learn more, definitely check it out when it comes out.
Oh, for sure.
I think this is going to be a good one, especially for a lot of people I know that maybe Bigfoot's just a little bit too much for them to go with. But when you start talking about mountain lions, now that's a different thing, because there's no stigma there not as much stigma when you come out and say, I had a mountain lion run across the road when I was traveling down the back road the other night or whatever. I saw something when I was hunting. It's I'm really looking forward to this to see how she does.
That's the point. I always kind of joke around. This is sort of the gateway between like more fringe cryptozoology and the fringe, at least to the general public, and then what's acceptable. Because whenever I do these kind of events or talks or anything like that, I'm talking about Bigfoot, I'll be talking about Champ, the lake monster, all kinds of stuff. And mountain lions is often what people most often report to me as what they've seen in their local areas, which is interesting. There's definitely much less of a reluctance to talk about it, because this is an animal that's real. They used to live in this area. They probably still do, and they're returning to this range that they abandoned. So I don't think it's as controversial as something like Bigfoot to a general audience. So I think a lot of people that are interested in cryptozoology probably will like this, because we like a lot of this cryptid sort of stuff. Yet I think it's going to have an appeal with general public as well, who might not even know what cryptozoology is, but they're like, oh yeah, my uncle said he saw a mountain lion in his backyard, so I'll send him it. I've heard a lot of stories like that of people saying similar sort of stuff. So.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and it's fascinating to think that the one that they captured or got the blood samples from goes back to South Dakota. But I believe that could happen. These animals travel long distances, right? And who knows how many years or how long it took them to get there. But like when you look at, I know it's a whole different species, but orca whales travel 100 miles a day. So, why couldn't a cougar? They're fast, you know?
And that's the thing. These animals, they don't respect our natural borders, whether they're international or state, line on a map. They're going to do their thing. And a lot of what people say about cougars being seen out this way, mountain lions out here, is they typically tend to be males, younger males that are maybe leaving their family group and they're trying to establish their own territory, and they're moving out east. And now, some of the New England states are the most forested states in the country. We have so much deer and other natural resources that these things could wander around for years aimlessly looking for a mate and be told that stay hidden. You have contiguous forests from the Midwest to the Northeast. They could just slink in and out of our civilization. I mean, the one in Connecticut was able to get into one of the most densely populated areas of Connecticut before it was killed, and it's only seen a handful of times before that. So that just goes to show that animals will find a way. And I totally believe that there are mountain lions from the West that have made their way out here on many occasions. I mean, it has to be the factors.
Oh, yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the entire region of New England is uphill too.
A lot of it is, we got a lot of mountains, a lot of hills, exactly. And you know what it is? Big cats, mountain lions in particular, like a lot of these cliff areas. They like the sun on them and kind of sunbathe. Like that's what, like you ever seen a house cat just kind of in there in the sun. Well, mountain lions and house cats are actually very closely related. Mountain lions are the largest of the lesser cat order. So, that would not include lions and tigers, which are a totally different sort of category. So mountain lions and house cats are pretty similar. A mountain lion is the largest cat that can purr. So pretty interesting.
Awesome.
Interesting.
Fascinating.
They can meow too, which is kind of weird. You wouldn't expect that. I've heard it.
And if you ever hear them, because when I used to be on a paranormal team, we were way up north and we did this outside investigation, and oh my God, it sounded like just a scream on our audio, and we didn't know what it was. And when we had the forest people listen to it, they said, "Oh, well, that was a mountain lion," and we're like, it sounded just like a human woman, like screaming. It was just the craziest thing.
Some really weird noises. I mean, there's been some camera videos of them making these squeaking noises. So I actually witnessed a mountain lion last year when I was at one of these nature centers that has here in New Hampshire. They have 2 mountain lions that were rescued from out west. Like a hunter had killed their mother, and then they were put up for adoption. And it's kind of like a natural science center / zoo. So they have the woodland species. So they have these 2 mountain lions, and one of the ladies who does the feeding, they had this kind of little metal gate, and it was like these bars, and she would put up food, like a little dead mouse for some grab, and it would start purring, and I'd be standing 3 feet away, and you could feel the purr on you, like if you ever had a house cat just sitting in your lap, it kind of vibrates through your body. With mountain lion, I was like 3 feet away. I didn't want to get close.
You could feel it, yeah.
Feel it, and then it let out this meow, and it was like this a little bit more aggressive than like the cat meows, but it was very interesting to hear that. I wouldn't have expected that. This beautiful animal looks very majestic, but if this thing got your back, I mean, you would be done. You're juggling. That's it.
Oh yeah.
Don't answer them.
Alexander, what are you may have just answered this question, but what are some of the things that you absolutely had no idea about with mountain lions that you learned in your quest for knowledge and information for this project? Maybe like family or social structure that they adhere to, or characteristics. What were some of the more interesting things that you learned that you had no idea of?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that they're mostly like a solitary animal, which I think kind of makes sense. They're not like a group of lions that hang out in a pride, as we call it. Mountain lions, for the most part, it's either just males alone, or if they're breeding, I guess, the male and the female, and then the female will be with the cubs. There's not really like a big family structure. And they have like at least in the areas west, they have like a 70 to 100 mile range, which is the area within which they feed, which I think is interesting. And some people have speculated that maybe out east it would even need to be less of a range because there's a lot more forest cover than there would in the Rocky Mountains. You have sort of patches of forest in the mountains, and a mountain lion will utilize all these different areas. So there's a lot of things like that. I'd say probably the most surprising was that thing about the purring and the sort of meowing and the cat-like noises, because you can't really domesticate a mountain lion. I guess you could try. I've seen some videos of people doing it, but not that I would recommend doing that. I wouldn't, but just that interesting things like that kind of caught me off guard. And I guess the amount of sightings too. That's another thing that I didn't expect. I had heard obviously plenty of sightings, but I had so many people just reaching out to me. I even had a close friend, that I'd known for years, saying, "Oh yeah, like I had a sighting of one while I was hunting as a kid with my dad in Vermont." He never told me that story. he knew I was into this stuff, but he didn't really associate this with cryptozoology.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
In a perfect world, with just, let's say, if you could put one of these cats into a situation where they had unlimited everything to feed on, what do you think their primary food source that they would go after would be?
That's a good question. Probably smaller prey, I would guess. Probably mid-sized animals. I mean, mountain lions will, from what I've seen, they will attack a horse. They will attack larger animals. But I think it's probably going to be less of a fight going after things like rabbits or maybe even coyotes, other smaller, like I said, mid-range sized critters. So they would go after deer too. I mean, that's a given. They're the widest prey species that we have everywhere. So I doubt they'd go after a moose if they had the choice every time.
Right.
Something as big as a moose is just a hassle to take down. Whereas you can just take down a couple rabbits, something smaller, and you're all set, right? There's not going to be much of a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of people forget, is that it's the same way with like the great apes, that like they actually don't want to fight with each other. They want to intimidate each other, because if one of them gets hurt in the process, then that may mean starvation to the one that was hurt.
Yeah.
So it would make sense they'd go after the smaller prey.
Even so toddlers too would be included in what mountain lions would definitely go after.
Mm-hmm.
Our young. So I heard from the people at this nature center, they said, well, it's interesting, even though these mountain lions have been raised in captivity, I mean, they don't treat them like pets. They just have a scheduled feeding. They're not exactly wild, but they say every time there's parents with their little toddlers, the mountain lions still perk up and they're looking around saying, this is a bite-sized snack here. They're saying that big guy, he's going to be hard to take down, but look at that little thing right there. That would be a great snack. They have to get their whole lives in a way, and they still have that instinct of, I'm going to go for the least struggle, the thing that's going to give me the least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Wow. People, keep your kids away from those mountain lions at the zoo, let me tell you. Good stuff. Good stuff. I was just trying to read the chat room. There's all kinds of comments in the chat room. Karen's talking about the Wildlife Center of Minnesota, which I guess I didn't know too much about. That's really close to me, and they do mountain lions there, and they have bears and wolves and coyotes and all kinds of stuff there. So that's really cool.
It's just fascinating to just see these animals.
Yeah.
And for me, that was obviously the opportunity to get some really close-up shots for the documentary, of course. But it's just interesting to watch them go about their business. I mean, I actually just on my screen right here is rotating a picture I have of the mountain lion licking its paw. I got to take a footage of them licking their paw. So, I mean, it's just like something a little house cat would do.
Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, so let's switch gears here. You've done a documentary on Champ, the lake horse of Lake Champlain.
Yep.
And do you know Katie Elizabeth?
I do, yeah. She was one of the subjects there in the documentary.
Yeah, so she was just on our show a few weeks ago, and I've known her for a while. But so tell us about Champ and that documentary that you did about him, or the population. I know it's not just one. Right.
Yeah, that's probably people get surprised, but that's probably my favorite cryptozoology mystery is the Champlain mystery. I was as a kid always really interested in Loch Ness, which is obviously in Scotland. I mean, Nessie is like the most famous cryptid aside. And it's funny because I grew up 3 hours from Lake Champlain, and I never really put too much thought into it. I was always like, Loch Ness is what I'm interested in. Loch Ness gets all the press. And so I really hadn't put too much thought into Champ. And a couple of years ago, I'd been talking about doing a series with my buddies at Small Town Monsters or some kind of documentary. And I'd been talking to Katie as well. She kept saying, you should do a Champ documentary. And then also William Drake Innes, who unfortunately passed away recently last year, who was very known for the Bigfoot research. He actually was a former government contractor that created he had this mobile Bigfoot research van, and he was pretty popular like in the 2000s. Really nice guy. Well, he converted his research to Champ research. Scott Martis, who's another Champ research, who I know Tommy knows Scott as well. So Bill had been telling me, you should come and help us photograph our annual Champ expedition. So all the pieces kind of fell into place, and it was July 2017, and I was heading to Lake Champlain, playing the Jurassic Park theme song as I was driving up.
I love it.
Yeah, I was excited, and so I'd never really, like I said, done too much of a deep dive into Champ, but through the course of filming for basically 4 weekends between then, I did 3 weekends during the summer of 2017 and a brief winter shoot in early 2018 during the winter. I learned a lot about it, and then obviously in research mode, I learned a tremendous amount between Katie and Scott's kind of research on it. They had a lot of different information about just the lake itself and how fascinating it is, and it just captivated me. And whenever I'm up there in Vermont, I'm always trying to go up to the lake and check it out. And it's a mystery, even though I did the series, which is a 5-part documentary series all about the mystery and the researchers, I still am very interested in that subject.
Well, we have a lake monster right here in Minnesota. Her name is Peppy, and she lives in Lake Pepin.
I've heard of that.
Oh, and I've talked to so many people who have seen Peppy. I have not yet, but that's one of the things my team really needs to get down on the lake down there and see what we can find. But fascinating stuff, Yeah,
like I said, whenever I'm up there in Vermont, I'm always trying to get up to the lake, and my brother now goes to school 20 minutes from the lake, so it really doesn't take a lot for me to get up there and explore. And it's not that far. I mean, it's 2.5, 3 hours.
Yep.
So like I said, I always was interested in Loch Ness, and then I realized, this is like even more interesting than Loch Ness, and I think has for it. So it's always interesting.
Have you encountered any of the woo-woo side of things with Champ, like any of the paranormal type of things, or when you're doing your Champ stuff, are you just looking for a leftover dinosaur type of thing?
I don't know. I mean, my personal favorite theory, now I'm not saying this is what I subscribe to, but I really like the idea of a giant turtle, some sort of a turtle with a long neck. That's like, and it doesn't need too much air, so that's why it's seldom seen. Some of the sightings, have pointed to some sort of a creature like that. But I have never really experienced anything too weird, I would say, with Champ. I've never had like a sighting of Champ or anything. The only real, I guess, anything close to an encounter would be during the filming. We were out there at dusk with Katie and her team, like echolocation, hydrophone with the water, and we heard like this clicking noise in the water that sounds kind of like those recordings that you hear of dolphins and whales and the stuff that's being purported as Champ echolocation. Some of that, and I was just like, this is really weird. I don't know what's going on here, but I have heard plenty of weird stories from Lake Champlain. Man, there's a lot. So there's a story about ghost pirate ship on Lake Champlain.
Nice.
Yeah, so
I love it.
There's this gas station I always stop up there in St. Albans, Vermont, which is a very interesting area because it's just this little bay. And it's supposedly in somewhere around St. Albans was where Sandra Mancy took her famous photo in 1977. What looks like the head and the neck. That's up for debate, but somewhere around there. And St. Albans was actually the place where the northernmost battle of the Civil War was fought. Some people call it that, where Confederates actually that were had escaped to Canada, from prisoner of war camps in New England. They escaped to Canada and they planned a raid in St. Albans where they attacked basically a bank and robbed the bank. It was a glorified bank robbery, and all the guys were rounded up or killed. But some people still call it the northernmost battle of the Civil War, which I think is kind of funny. So there's always this gas station I go to in this town, and I asked the clerks, like I have never, I'm not pretending to be anyone or anything. I just kind of asked them, so you guys heard about this camp thing? Do you think there's anything to it? I always like to just ask people in the community to just think about it. I've gotten a couple interesting stories, and then a couple of years ago, some lady told me that there was a UFO that was seen coming out of the lake, so right out of the water, USO kind of stuff. There was actually a pretty famous abduction case called the Colchester abduction from also, I think, the 70s, which was right on the shores of Lake Champlain. It was a couple of kids at a summer camp said that they were abducted by this strange craft that had like a turtle-like shell on it almost. Very weird description. And then I heard about the ghost pirates, and I was like, ghost pirates?
Ghost pirates, I love that.
This guy basically told me, he's like, yeah, there's supposedly in St. Albans Bay, there's a ghost pirate ship. I'm like, really? So I started doing some research, and the history is actually that we're pirates on Lake Champlain, believe it or not. I don't think it was exactly like the Johnny Depp kind, but Lake Champlain is a very huge body of water. It's one of the largest lakes in America.
Mm-hmm.
During both the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, there were a lot of naval battles that happened on Lake Champlain. And after the War of 1812, there was an embargo by President Jefferson with Canada, British Canada. You know, they was controlled by the English. They basically said that trade wasn't allowed with Canada. And at the time, a lot of people in the local economy relied on sending goods to Canada for money. You know, they were basically, you could take Lake Champlain all the way up to Montreal by the river.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, you know, their connection to the St. Lawrence Seaway and the world. So there's this place called Smuggler's Notch in Vermont. It's now like a ski resort area, but there's these cliffs and these kind of valleys that join up, and there's all these caves, and that's where these smugglers used to store things and then move them out to the river that would connect to Lake Champlain, and there would be crews that would smuggle it up to Canada. Well, there was this one ship called the Black Snake, interestingly enough, and there was a bunch of these guys on there, and they were pirates, whatever. And then the U.S. government contracted some privateers to go after them, and there was some kind of a battle they had in the Winooski River. It wasn't very dramatic, but they had this long gun on the ship, and supposedly they killed 3 of the agents that were after them. And then there was like a panic, and everyone abandoned ship. All the guys were rounded up, and a lot of them were hung and executed in Burlington, Vermont, one of the first big public executions. So some people say that the ghost ship Black Snake is still seen on the stage. So it's a fun story.
That's
a
fantastic.
fun story.
Yeah, really interesting. And there's so many stories like that. That UFO story I mentioned is not the only one from Lake Champlain. There's a lot of other stories. And, of course, at the other end of the lake, where the lake actually starts, you have Whitehall, New York, which is right on the shore of South Bay Lake Champlain, and Whitehall is famous, of course, for Bigfoot. If you go to Whitehall today, you'll see Champ's Restaurant next to the Sasquatch Saloon, and like Bigfoot statues and Bigfoot pizza, and
Wow.
They have like a double cryptid thing going on, which I think is really cool.
That is really cool. I have to get out there.
Beautiful country either way.
It sounds like just a ball. So Karin in the chat room saying, I did say something about, I know there's not just one creature in Lake Champlain, but she's saying, how do they know there are several? Do you want to answer that? I know that Katie Elizabeth has been on our show too, and she's talked about that, but I'm sure you know too. So can you answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how exactly you'd quantify how many there are, and I'm not, of course, pretending to be an expert or anything. I'm just somebody that was interested in it and did a series on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's obviously a controversial question, but one of the sightings that I know of that's a very famous sighting was one where a woman actually saw 2 creatures. One was a smaller one and one was a larger one.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very famous sighting. I interviewed actually the brother of this woman who in the 60s or 70s, I can't really remember, they basically have this little boathouse that's right at the mouth of the Winooski River where landlocked Atlantic salmon go into spawn. There's been a lot of sightings at this mouth of this river. And so they have a little boathouse, and they rent kayaks and canoes out for people. I mean, you can say Charlie's Boathouse in North Burlington. You can still rent kayaks. I do it when I'm up there, in the summertime, which is beautiful. And they were sleeping in the boathouse, and they saw a couple of sightings. One was just a solitary creature, but there was a boat ramp that went right into the water, and there was a street lamp right above the ramp. So they saw under the street light larger creature with a long neck that was like a greenish color, and a smaller one with more of a brownish color. They both had this long dinosaur-like neck, and they saw it pretty clearly under the street light. And nobody believed them because they said it was seen on land. Actually, it wasn't. It was still in the water, but it was just the boat ramp right there. So that would indicate that there would be more than one. I mean, if that sighting if you're to say that it's an authentic sighting, which is hard to do with sightings, but I don't have a reason to believe that those people lied. That's probably the most high-profile one I know of where it was multiple animals seen.
That's
Well,
cool.
as long as we've come this far into things, Alexander, what else do you have going on? Have you been making it to the woods to investigate any Bigfoot stuff or anything like that going on? I know you're a man of many hats.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always out in the woods. I'm a big hiker and outdoorsman, and whether I'm camping or out shooting or something, just I like being out in the woods. And there's a spot. I don't really consider myself, I guess, a researcher in that sense. I've heard a lot of stories and I'm interested in this stuff, but I'm not actively like out there trying to prove anything exists, right? Maybe aside from to myself. But there's this one spot I have where I like to go out and camp and do some bonfires every once in a while. Just kind of middle of nowhere, peaceful spot. And I know from friends that have done investigations there has been activity in that area. Well, this summer, I was out there with a friend of mine this past summer. We were just, hanging out by the fire, just the two of us, and we kept hearing things walking around our camp pretty much like all night. And it wasn't freaky or anything. It just got kind of annoying at one point because I literally just grabbed a flashlight and ran into the woods. I'm like, I'm straight at this thing because I want to see what's going on. There's nothing there, right? So in typical fashion. So, we're just hanging out the rest of the night. Then we start going to sleep, and I had my audio recorder just hung it right in the top of the tent. And I got maybe 45 minutes of good audio before snoring got rid of anything we would have heard. And in that audio, which I reviewed, we had at least one very clear knock just coming from right in the woods. And we had a couple other sort of ruffles, something kind of stomped around in the area. Nothing definitive. I mean, I know knocks are not the most phenomenal evidence of anything, but it was still interesting because that area where I had a suspicion that there was some stuff going on, and I'd been told about some sightings, and some buddies of mine that I really trust had actually been on a case out there where the homeowners had some stuff going on. So that was interesting. I mean, I'm always interested in Bigfoot stories. My next project will be more in a book, the literary sense. I'm going to probably do a book on Bigfoot stories in New Hampshire, and I think there's some really great stories. In fact, I just heard one a couple weeks ago. I do some of these library talks where I'll show some short documentaries. There's one called Granite State Bigfoot, which is just about some of my favorite cases I've heard from here in New Hampshire. And I show one of my documentaries, the Sasquatch Out of the Shadows, one of those episodes I show. And I always get people telling me their stories, in the library. And I had a guy tell a story, which is really, really interesting. In the 90s, he was up in White Mountains, which is, one of my favorite areas to stomp around and hike in. I've hiked up the mountains up there. He was in an area where there's this abandoned mine, or it's like an old mining kind of camp. They still have all the equipment just strewn about in the woods, and the giant coils and all the stuff. I haven't made it up to that place yet, but it's a very fascinating area. Well, he said he was out there with some friends, and he saw this 8-9 foot tall hairy creature with a coal black or charcoal black skin, reddish brown hair, almost like a baboon face, and it was swinging its back on a telephone pole. And he noticed it, and then he apparently it noticed him, and it took off. But he said, I mean, it was very clear what it was, and I'm hoping to make it up to that spot with him to do an interview with him, like right where that happened. It was just so I'm always hearing stories like that, so I decided that I might as well document some of them because it's very fascinating. I mean, I grew up near a case where in the 70s there was a camper shaker kind of Bigfoot. A couple nights in a row, people were having something shaking their camper, and one of the guys either brushed up his shoulder or something happened, and he saw this thing, this 8 foot tall, blondish colored Sasquatch, and an anthropologist from Harvard somehow got involved in this case, and he was conducting interviews with all the people who had this happen, and he wrote a paper called Why There Must Be a Bigfoot. And this guy was like a very well-known anthropologist at Harvard, not too far from where this incident had happened in New Hampshire. So there's a lot. There's definitely a lot, and I'm always drawn to that kind of stuff.
Well, that was nice of him to throw his career away for it too. Yeah.
Well, it was funny because I tried to track. I contact actually it was like the Harvard Peabody Museum or something like that he was a representative of. Now a lot of his work has been drawn into question. He did a lot of stuff about the theories of racial groups and all kinds of stuff. So a little bit controversial in the 21st century, but Guy's name was Carlton Kuhn. He was respected at the time, and I think he was in touch with Grover Krantz and some of those other guys because he either did attend one of their Sasquatch summits or was in correspondence with them, because in his piece, which you can still read, he mentions about Grover Krantz and I think Renee DeHinden as well. I'm not sure. I haven't read it in a while, but it's really fascinating because I think it's like thing led to another. How did this guy even get involved in a Bigfoot case that, you know, the locals call it the Hollis flea monster? It happened at a flea market. And so that's kind of, you know, you'd think like a giant flea. That's what a lot of people think. But
Yeah.
Isn't it funny to look back on the original guys that were in this? What a bunch of badasses those guys were. I mean, those guys are just nuts. Think of the abuse they took.
Well, I think, who was it? Krantz famously said, you know, he was asked, how does his university tolerate his interest in Bigfoot? And I think his response was, well, I mean, they tolerate in the sense that I haven't been fired. I didn't get tenure or anything like that. So,
Right.
So we have about 9 minutes left, but do you have a website? So why don't you tell us what that is, so if people want to look you up and you know, try to get your new Lions of the East movie that's coming out and any of your other films, you know, that they can get it from there. And I'll type it into the chat room too. So tell us what it is.
There's links to everything on there. It's just petakovmedia.com, and that's spelled PETAKOV media.com. Just my last name, media.com. And there's links to everything on there, all the movie stuff. I do blog a little bit. I'll do I've done some pieces on some of my adventures and New England cryptids, other kind of fun stuff. I actually have an article I did last year about the weirder stories from Lake Champlain. That would probably interest you, Tom. Just some of the stories I kind of just told you guys about the UFO and the pirates, but that's just nice to find everything out. There's links to all the media and everything on there too.
Yeah, fun stuff.
Stephanie's probably going to kill me for this, but
oh no, I know what's coming now.
It's time for us to ask you your opinion of the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Sure.
Because in true he said, she said form, Stephanie and I have differing opinions on this, and we're on each end of the spectrum, so we're curious where you're at. Yeah,
that's a tough one. So, there are some things I like about it, some things I don't. I think a lot of the, I guess you could say, dubious circumstances around probably Patterson himself, and some of the stuff that he was involved in is a little bit sketchy for me, but at the same time, I think the costume looks pretty, or if it's a costume.
See?
It looks interesting. But I will say this, I will say that I think it doesn't matter whether or not it's real, because at this point, has there been any other film that's been more analyzed than the PGF film, aside from maybe the Zapruder film, JFK? I mean, there's nothing that's been that scrutinized, looked at, and no one can really come out one way or another. I think either way, it has no bearing on whether Bigfoot is real or not, or it will be proven from this piece of film, because obviously it doesn't measure up to what would be needed for definitive evidence for Bigfoot. I mean, and I like it, and obviously Patty has influenced every Bigfoot image you see is that famous frame. And yeah, I probably haven't done enough research into it to know all the little ins and outs, but I would say I'm a little torn on it. You know, I would want it to be real, definitely, but I would say that I just don't. I'm not really in a position of authority to say either way. Maybe that's a cop out, but the moot point.
Can I just say that is the most eloquent non-answer I have ever heard in my life.
That's
Bravo,
true.
sir. Bravo.
But he did talk about how that was the best costume he had ever seen.
Yeah, that's right.
Can I just say?
I think we might have
a costume. It's damn good, if I'm allowed to say that. I mean, it's.
I think we're going to have to put a hash mark in the Stephanie camp on this one.
I think we might. I think so. Aleksandar, here's what I say about the Patty film. Yeah, I think it's cool, and I want to believe that it's real. But when you look at it and you look at Patty's behind, it looks like it's just a pillow sitting there. I mean, I can't get past that. Anything else is probably cool, but that pillow on the butt, and it looks square. It looks like there's just a pillow back there, just hanging out. Can I just say?
I will say though that like a lot of Bigfoot eyewitnesses I've talked to, they have compared it to Patterson-Gimlin and said it looks like that. You know, given I'm not a witness, I would probably put in their court saying they're more of experts in terms of what a Bigfoot looks like if they've seen one. So, you know, again, that's part of that. I'm just interested in that historical aspect and whether or not this thing will prove that Bigfoot's real. I don't think it will. So.
Troll's just saying Patty's fluffy in the chat room.
Well, and you make a super valid point there too. Really, at this point, as that is the most viewed piece of film in existence, it doesn't matter if it's real or not because it has brought so many people like myself into this field. So that's a great answer.
Like in Champ, the Manson photo, which I love. I don't know if it's real or not, but I don't think it's going to prove Champ's real. I was one of the last people to interview Sandra Mancy. I don't for a second believe she hoaxed it or faked it. She genuinely saw something she couldn't believe right there and got a picture of it. But unfortunately, it's just not going to be admissible evidence in terms of proving that something's real or not.
Mm-hmm. It just gets everybody aware.
And I know I had asked Scott Martis before what he felt the best thing in the world of Champ was, and he cited that photograph as well too.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't a lot for Champ, so there's that, and you've got a couple other things that are for at least visual evidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fun stuff. But yeah, I agree. All that stuff has just brought so much interest, and you know, Chewbacca from Star Wars was based on Bigfoot, right? And it was the Patty film. I heard.
Actually, I think I'll take it one step further. I think that was. I think Chewbacca's a psyop because they're preparing us for disclosure. I do. That's how they do it.
You know, I heard the stories that apparently when they were filming not Empire Strikes Back, they were filming some of the Endor scenes, right? That the guy who played Chewbacca was warned not to go too far off set because somebody might shoot him.
Oh my! Well, and they were up in the redwoods, right? So they were out in the woods. Who knew? You know.
But country at the time, especially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I love it. I love it. What a great conversation. Oh, well, 2 minutes left, Tommy. Questions?
Well, I think we've covered everything. Once again, I'd like to mention that Aleksandar has his movie Lions of the East coming out.
Yes.
We thank him for coming in. He has a great body of work behind him, especially for being such a young guy. He gets my full endorsement as someone who is very interesting and worth looking into and checking out his work. He's got quite a library.
Oh, absolutely.
It was nice meeting you, man. When we met out in Pennsylvania, that was like 2 days after my UFO sighting I had out there. So that was it was meant to happen, apparently.
Yeah,
that's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, and that was a nice area that we got to night hike in down there and stuff too. And it had something for everyone. UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, murder scene, everything was there.
Area. So, yeah, I can't wait to get back to Pennsylvania in general. You guys got a lot of weird stuff going on, so it draws other weirdos from other parts of the
Yeah, I mean, we've got Trost here, so there's the proof.
Don't pick on Trost now. Come on, you. Oh, goodness. All right. Well, yeah. So check out his website because he writes pretty good blogs too. I was reading a blog as we went into the show here tonight, so I didn't finish it, but I will. And the new movie comes out, Lions of the East, mid-March. He's got a bunch of other movies out there too. So everyone, check him out. He's awesome.
Thanks, Aleksandar.
Yeah, thank you
guys
so
for having
much.
me.
Yeah.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.